I got my Eagle Scout and Boy Scout, so one of the merit badges, the UU version of the religious merit badge is called Religion and Life. And I wrote an essay on why I'm an atheist and presented it to Dr. Bragg, and he thought it was wonderful, so I got my Religion and Life award. I was fortunate enough to retire early, and so in my last year at DST, I was thinking about more meaningful things to get involved in. And Linda and Robin Parkinson had been members for a while, and they live across the street. And we're a constant reminder of All Souls is over there. You should get back over there and check it out. So I did, and it felt like coming back home. Of course, I didn't know anybody except I ran into Louise Baggett one day, and she goes, "Oh, it's little Bobby Miller." And so I'm like, "Yeah, this is where I used to hang out."
My favorite memories that stick out tend to be more when my eldest was around 6, probably 5 or 6, and was very trying to figure out death and what happened after death. And I told him what I believed. I told him what other people believed. His father told him what he believed. We talked about all the different beliefs that are out there and religions that come up with answers for that. And he was just he was not satisfied. And so our minister at the time was John Weston. And John didn't have a lot to do with the kids downstairs, but Ben really liked John. And John was always very kind and he just didn't spend a lot of time downstairs. But I made an appointment with John for Benjamin, and the two of them went into his office, and I sat out in the lobby, and all I could hear was, I'd hear this murmur, 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 and then John laughing and laughing, and then murmur, 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 and John laughing, and I just so wish I had been a fly on that wall. I have no idea what he said, but Benjamin came out of there and felt at peace with whatever information he got, and felt like it was okay, that he knew what he needed to know, and that was it. And I'll never forget John's laugh through the walls. And
so we were still fairly new, and so I didn't realize sometimes we might do a scenario at the beginning of church, So there was a time when it was a scenario, but I didn't realize it, and different folks would stand up and kind of give a testimony as to how they were treated unfairly, whether it was a woman in a work environment, or whether it was someone who wasn't able to love the person they truly needed to love. And it just broke my heart, because here I am looking around, and even some of the conceptions that I had as a kid growing up were I thought, I knew I was taught that certain things weren't okay, but when you hear someone's testimony and all they want to do is love who they need to love or what have you, it moves you, And anyhow, afterwards, I realized, oh, wait, those people were playing a part, but it was meaningful. But I think the fact that it was acted out, it resonated with me, and it kind of changed some of it helped me completely shed some of the upbringing that I had had. I had a great upbringing, but it was biased in a lot of ways. So I think that was a meaningful moment for me.
I was also on the board when our minister left under somewhat ignominious circumstances. So that created quite a dispute there for a while, and that happened during the summer. And one thing I remember about that was a particular members, husband and wife, were very angry about it. And so we sat around and said, well, what are we going to do about that? Because in September, we were going to start our new church year. Back in those days, we didn't meet during the summer. And we decided, well, we're just going to let them get up in front and say their piece. And so they did, and they complained for 10 minutes and then said, we talked it over and we decided no other church would have us, so we're going to stay.
we lived over in Kansas, and no friends of Carrie's that she went to school with attended here. And she said, I really want to go to church with some of my friends. And I said, that's okay. I just want you to go to church every Sunday. And so she did. She started one of the churches in the community. And, it wasn't too long after she was there, they went on a retreat. And part of the subject in that retreat was how to convert your Jewish friends. She came home. Mom, I'm not going to go to that church anymore. I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I am not going to do that. And I thought, yes. Yes, let's be inclusive. And I think, that's been one of the gifts of this church is
started by a group of fellows that a group of men who had participated in World War II or had a memory of World War II. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago I had a memory of. I had 2 brothers in the Marine Corps, and I lost a cousin in World War II who had been in the Marine Corps. At any rate, and they would meet, I think they started to meet like the first or third Fridays of the month and that kind of thing. And would you believe their memory wasn't good enough to remember that, and so they went to meeting every Friday, so there wasn't any question. And they've been meeting on Fridays ever since then, at 10 o'clock on Friday mornings. And it wasn't until about 2.5, 3 years ago that I finally convinced them that if they wanted to continue, they were going to have to change the rules and take anybody that thought they were old enough to run with the bulls, But, and there are no rules that, we have some delightful people. We have a gentleman who joined us just in the last couple of 3 years who asked after he had been there, he does not happen to be a member of the church, but he said, isn't there anything that's taboo? And of course there is none. You talk about whatever you want to talk about. There's no structure. They come, they meet, they exchange stories about their lives, about what they're concerned about. Sometimes we get more than we want to know, and other times we feel like we jumped from subject to subject to subject and didn't solve anything.
My grandson, who was 8 or 9, ran the sound system for the coffee house a couple of times. And he and I made up a song one time. We were just leaving here, and there were all the limousines over at the Kemper Museum. So we made up this song, I'm riding in my limousine. And it went on from, I got a hot tub in my limousine, and just kept adding verses to it. It was fun to work with him on that.
Service for the Soul would have been in the 90s someplace. John Weston initiated it, is my memory, and put together essentially a cookbook, a script, with a few materials, but mostly a script to help get started. And I think he led the first 2 or 3 or something, and then said, okay, it's your turn, And so we, the participants, of which probably ran 15 to 25, I would guess, started signing up to say, okay, I'll do this service. And these were Friday night services, about an hour in length, meditative in many ways, and gave an opportunity to engage with the church, with the movement, with something other than the Sunday morning, more traditional service in a more informal way. And I think a lot of people really loved it, and it went on for several years. I think after John Weston moved on, he went and joined the UUA, in fact, staff. It went on for, my memory is a year or two or three, and then kind of tapered away. I don't know why, but it did. And but it was a grand experiment, and I think people who got to do it really appreciated it. So I know I did. So, you know, we had a time of meditation, which a lay leader would organize and create, really. And they took all kinds of forms, everything from the sharing of bread to a piece of music to silence. And so I guess that was one of the, I don't know, calming aspects of it. It was a quiet spot at the end of usually hectic weeks, and a way for people to be part of a service, which they seldom get a chance to do on Sunday.
Lester Mondale was the minister at that time. They didn't have much of a church school, so I would sit with my parents and listen to the sermons. I have memories of the choir being small and awful, and even I could tell that at age 8 or 9, as the case might have been. For one story at that point, I did understand that ministers occasionally would use the word hell. So in one sermon by Lester Mondale, he began to say hell quite a bit, and I started counting the number of times he said it. He had a very warm hand as you walked out the door, and as he took my hand, I said, "Reverend Mondale, you said hell 24 times, which doubled him over. And
Al Brenner, who was great on introducing people, is that he introduced me to Lowell. Apparently, this is a second marriage for both Lowell and me, and we'd met just very, very briefly about a year earlier, but nothing that was lasting, just one of those things in coffee hour where how do you do, and that's the end of it. But then after Lowell was divorced, apparently he asked Al who we should meet in the church. And I, at that point, was in final throes of my divorce, and Al had advanced my name to Lowell, and I was on my way out to the parking lot to drive home after church, and Lowell came through another exit just as Al was coming in. And he said, "Phyllis, do you know old Lowell?" And I said, "No, old Lowell, this is old Phyllis." Well, we got off into silly billy stuff, and that was just before Christmas, and January 6th we had a first date, and by June we were married. So that was 29 plus years ago.
Eventually, they changed the name to Interweave, which includes everyone, GLBT, Q, whatever. It just goes on. It gets longer every year. Every time I hear it, I lose track of what it means. Plus, we include straight people who are allies, friends, supporters, people who encourage us. Actually, right now, Interweave is not active, and I think the main reason it isn't active is we feel so supported. It's almost like having a blue-eyed club or a left-handed club. It just isn't necessary. So it's still on our minds as a movement and still exists, but we just feel a part of the mainstream, and that, I think, is the goal.
Demeter's was the big women's group, and at that time it was really the younger women with children, or stay-at-home moms, which were still pretty common at that time in the early 70s. And I came to that, it was on a Tuesday, if I remember correctly, and it was for lunch. I was working and working hard, but I always took that day and left work at 10:30 and went back at 2:30 and just stayed late because that day was important to me. To be with the women and to have a chance to talk with them, and the food was always delicious, but it was really the community. We had a little program too. Somebody came and spoke to us, and so it was educational. We raised money for the church. Really a satisfying group. And Demeter's, as probably everybody knows, is still ongoing. Although now it's sort of the older women's group. Yeah.
My mom knew people in the chorus and said that'd be a great way for you to get to meet people in the gay community. At the time, Heartland Men's Chorus rehearsed here at All Souls. So it was fortuitous. I was like, oh, not only did I find the chorus, I find a UU church, and okay, I'm here on Tuesdays to rehearse, and I'll just come back on Sunday and see what's going on. I ended up meeting a man in chorus, and we kind of dated off and on in the first year, and so on our anniversary in 2002, we met up for dinner, and we were talking about one of the latest episodes, and finally I put down my fork and I just turned to him and said, so, when do you want to do it? Oh my God, I just proposed to you. So that kind of got the ball rolling. So then we started pulling together all the ideas that we'd talked about, things that we'd seen. We ended up meeting with Jim Eller with all sorts of ideas and thoughts and different readings and actions and things that we wanted to be part of the wedding. He made it a ritual that it started out with the community at large and family, and it slowly focused in to just me and Kelly, and then it widened back out to sharing the love that we had for each other and ways of sharing that and expressing that back with the community. So it was amazing.
Karen and I got married in the library. After it was over, my father-in-law stage whispered to my mother-in-law, "Are they really married?" It was 20 people at the most. We were married in front of the fireplace in the library. It was just very simple. We had, in those days, an idea of what we might want to do. And we had an idea of writing a wedding, a marriage service. And Dr. Bragg said, well, here's the one I use. And we took a look at it and said, that looks fine.
The wall, the Iron Curtain, had just fallen. And so things were opening up, and there was a delegation that went over there and found these Unitarian churches. And so they started a program called Partner Church. And we would meet, and there would be 20 of us gathered together thinking, what can we do? What can we do to help? And so the first thing we did was to get to know just by letters. And then we put together a trip to Transylvania. We were the first Americans in there, and the people were so glad to see us and, wanting to make contact with it. So from that time on, we then came back. We ended up buying a tractor for them. We ended up buying, having their organ fixed. I think that we here at All Souls have learned a lot
about Unitarianism through our contact with them. So.
One nice story was that there was a time, for quite a long time, that we had a man, Mr. Morris, who picketed us every Sunday. That's because we had the United Nations flag flying, and he didn't like the United Nations. And he picketed all the time, and we kind of liked being picketed by him, and we'd take him out coffee and things. And it got kind of bad, though, really bad, because after a while he got his followers to call Dr. Bragg in the middle of the night, time after time after time. And it was really bad because, being a minister, he couldn't get a silent number. So one time he invited him into his office for coffee, and he said, "You know, Mr. Morris, I have a problem that maybe you can help me with. There is someone who is making calls to me in the middle of the night, and I'm a minister, and I have to have this phone. And what do you think I should do?" And the old man just kind of muttered a while, but he never had any more calls after that. And he got so that he came in for church.
So there's kind of a not very attractive place to get married, but Demeter's and friends of mine, we folded those Japanese cranes, and we strung them and hung them all down from there were chandeliers up on the ceiling, and so you could hook over them, and we hung all these beautiful red and white cranes. This is for the dawn. And then my husband went out after Christmas to the Boy Scout Christmas tree lot and bought all their trees and made stands for them. And then I don't know how, we had probably 40 trees. So the church really looked beautiful. In fact, we left the cranes for a long time because the people really liked them.
And one of the things that I've been honored to be a part of is we help sponsor a soup supper on Christmas Eve that we serve before the church service, and it's not a fundraiser, it is just a community event, and it's always soup and bread and salad, and I really love making the soup for the group, and now that I have children that live out of town and I'm not always here on Christmas, I still make the soup and put it in the fridge for them, but this year was really glad to be back to being here and making the soup and serving it. It's a really lovely time of community for this church.
And at one of those occasions, I met somebody from Wisconsin, and she described how they had a program they called Yule Box that was offered at Christmas time. And if you wished to be a host, you signed up. And you had beverages. You had no responsibilities for cookies, special breads, cheese and crackers, whatever. People brought what they wanted to bring. And so I brought that idea back and said, let's go with it. And we've had, I guess that's been going at least 30 years. And there were people you could count on for the same thing every time. And there were people who would always get creative and make something new. But the nice thing was, it allowed you, if you were feeling, ooh, I'm kind of lonely tonight, I have nothing planned, to go, and your host or hostess was not surprised to see you turned up. They were delighted. I have had from up to 35 people come of an evening or an afternoon. That's another thing. But the fewest people was when there was 7 inches of snow, and I got 3 people who came.
That would have to be when my husband was sick. I lost my husband at a young age. He had cancer. And probably my best memories of Dr. Bragg coming over to the house during that time and sitting with him and sitting with all of us. And that was one of the few times I ever saw Dr. Bragg with tears in his eyes.